Hey, what's up everybody? This is OurMusicBox and today I want to show you guys a new Amara build that is one of the strongest builds in the game, and specifically it's insane for the new Maliwan raid. Now this video is going to be a little bit different because I'm going to be doing two variations of this build. They're both pretty similar in how they play, but they use different anointed effects on the weapons you're using, and they have a different talent layout. Now I've done two previous videos that are both Wotan kills. Now one is under 3 minutes and one is 1 minute and 5 seconds, and those are both the different build variations we're going to be going over. So the video is going to be a bit longer, but there's pretty much two builds within this video. So let's go straight into the talent for the first build, which is pretty much a rainbow version of this build. So before we go into the talents, the main thing we're using between both of these builds are any recursions that you have, and there's going to be a lot of difference on what you want because recursions can come with any weapon anointed, like all the weapons, and can come in any element. So there's going to be a lot of changes within what recursion you're using depending on what items you actually have, and then which of the two variations you're using. And then the main thing is the new spiritual driver class mod, which when you use your action skill, it applies your action skill element to yourself, and you get increased gun damage while moving, and the faster you're moving, the faster the gun damage. People have tested this and gotten over 500% damage increase, which is absolutely nuts. So it's pretty much the main things. Now there's a few other things that make specifically like the rainbow version an actual rainbow build, so all elements per shot. We'll go over to that because that's more anointed stuff and not really completely needed for the build. So for the talent setup, both variations are going to be going the exact same talent layout into Brawl, because this is pretty much what you kind of need for spiritual driver builds. So you go 5 out of 5 root to rise, max HP, personal space 3 out of 3, which is just increased damage, close yard to target, more damage increase, 2 in the helping hands, then max out into mindfulness, which is your movement speed increase, stacking up to 25 times. This is your main damage increase from spiritual driver, which is massive because you know you can get over 500% damage increase, which is nuts. So then we're going mainly into festive elements. 5 out of 5 anima, increased status effect damage. 5 out of 5 tempest, increased elemental damage. 5 out of 5 infusion, converts a portion of your damage to your action skill element, which we are keeping on soulfire for this variation. 1 in a dread, increase your gun damage after grasping an enemy. 1 in a deep well, increase magazine size with elemental weapons. Ricochet, or 3 into indiscriminate, which pretty much just has a chance to ricochet shots around. 5 out of 5 sustainment, which is just lifesteal off elemental damage. And then 1 into forceful expression, which just increase elemental damage or bonus elemental damage from your action skill element. Then for mythical assault, we have 1 into do harm, 1 into violent tapestry, just to have them pretty much. 3 into fast hands, which we're mainly just using for increased reload speed. 3 into transcendent, which gives you critical damage increase, mainly the reason we're using it off your action skill. Then 1 into restless, just for extra cooldown if you need it. Now for this build, a lot of the time you're not going to be using ties that bind, and this build is definitely much stronger for the raid just because of how many enemies there are, and using recursion is always going to be good for more enemies. And specifically on certain fights, like say a Wotan fight, you're not really going to be using your action skill ability on anything actually, because you want to keep it to always be able to use it to put an action skill element on yourself, which procs your elemental projector, and it keeps your mindfulness movement speed stacks up to give you that massive damage increase with spiritual driver. Now if you want to, you still can use ties that bind on enemies, especially if you're doing, I don't know, say something like the slaughter shaft. You use ties that bind, maybe you have to wait a few seconds for the next wave, so you're probably gonna have your cooldown up again. So that's kind of the different ways you can use it. As you'll see in the Wotan footage with this build, I don't really use this on enemies. I mainly use it to keep mindfulness on myself and keep action skill element on myself for elemental projector. Now, you could definitely use Soul Sap if you want to. Since you're not using your action skill a lot of the time on enemies, you can pretty much use whatever augment you want. But I just keep Ties That Bind just in case I want to use it on enemies. And you don't need a ton of action skill cooldown. Now, if you're doing stuff that you need to use your action skill a lot more, I'd recommend putting 5 out of 5 into Restless, and you can take, or I guess it'd be 4 out of 5, because you could take 3 out of Transcend. And you don't really need that unless you're in the raid. But you could put that on a cooldown if you really want to. So that's pretty much the entire talent setup. So overall, how this build works is pretty much you're using your action skill to apply your action skill element on yourself from Spiritual Driver. That gives you mindfulness, which will massively increase your movement speed, which then gives you the massive damage increase from Spiritual Driver, which also, since you're applying your action skill element to yourself, you're using Elemental Projector, which gives you a damage increase because you have that action skill applied to yourself. And then you're using recursion shots, which bounce a ton of different targets. The more they bounce, the more damage it does. Just doing like hundreds of % of damage increase with your recursion shots. And since your recursion's bouncing around, even if you have to stop and slow down a little bit while shooting it, you could then keep moving while it's bouncing around and get more damage increase while the bounces are happening. Now, for this being a rainbow build and all of that, you don't even need anything extra. You don't need to worry about having a bunch of different elements going at a time if you don't want to, because you don't even need these anointed on your grenade or your shield. That just adds more damage and more elemental damage through those. You don't need any anointed on your recursion. That's just going to add more damage. And you can do this build without having any of those anointed. It's just not going to be a rainbow build with a ton of different elements, but it's still going to be really good damage. So how we're getting the rainbow build right now is I'm using a recursion with shock on it, so that's our main shock damage. We're using infusion and forceful expression, which do fire because we're sitting on fire, so that's a fire element, so that's 2. Then we have on action skill and your next 2 magazines have bonus radiation damage, which since we're using a phase grasp, we can always have this up as well. So that's a radiation damage. On our shield, we have bonus corrosive damage for 10 seconds on action skill end, which you can have up all the time. So that's a corrosive. And then on our grenade, we have bonus cryo damage. So that's all of the elements. And since we're using recursion, it's bouncing around, hitting all the different targets with all the different elements. And like I said, you don't need to have all the different elements. Now with Elemental Projector, and having fire on it, we're basically just doing increased fire damage, so it's not super good, but we are doing quite a bit of fire damage, and having that extra 90% fire damage still does add a lot of damage. Now, like I said before, you could pretty much just do like one element. Like you could have a, corrosive recursion without any anointeds, switch your action skill element to corrosive with the class mod, apply corrosive to yourself. Now you're doing 90% increased corrosive damage and just having corrosive damage and massive damage increases. So stuff like that, but I still think it's really cool to be able to have every element per shot. So that's pretty much the entire build. For your shield and your grenade mod, you mainly want those anointed, but say something like a recharger is probably one of the best shields in my opinion, but just anything you want, having those anointed on are really good. Now also with this build, if you're needing more single target damage, you can definitely use Cutsmans and stuff like that, but without switching to Phase Slam, which you can actually do. It's not going to do as much, so you definitely want to have, if you need that more single target damage, you can have Cutsmans, you can have Crossroads, anything like that. With the good phase cast or phase slam anointed is going to be good, because you could just switch up your action skill ability whenever you want to get the big damage increases if you need that. So that's pretty much the entirety of the rainbow variant of this build. So now we're going to go to the more single target boss oriented build. So this variation is much more focused on just being able to kill bosses or certain bosses as quick as possible. So if you're not looking to like speed run certain boss kills or anything like that, I would recommend using the rainbow version of this build that we just went over, because that one's going to be more overall balance. It's going to have the good healing, and it's still going to be incredibly strong and allow you to do pretty much anything in the game solo on Mayhem 4. But this version is what I got my kill that on Wotan on Mayhem 4 solo in 1 minute and 5 seconds. So there's going to be quite a bit of changes, a pretty much completely different talent setup, and a few different item changes. Now we're going to go into the items after the talents, because we're still using the spiritual driver that we just went over and the elemental projector. So I'm going to try to go through the talents a little bit quicker because the video is going to be pretty long. So first off, we're going the same on Brawl, 5 out of 5 root to rise, 3 out of 3 personal space, 2 in a helping hands, and then full in a mindfulness. Then we're going mostly mythical assault, and the reason is we're mainly using phase slam annotated items in this, and we need the extra avatar uses, especially for doing the Wotan fight, because we can't just rely on being able to spam, you know, a phase grasp without having any cooldown. We're using phase slam, so we need that extra cooldown. So 3 out of 3 fast hands, 1 in a do harm, 1 in a violent tapestry, 3 into transcend, 2 into alacrity, 5 into restless for that cooldown, because we need that. Cooldown is actually pretty important with this build, which also means it's going to get much stronger when the guardian rank talents are reactivated. 3 into from rest, we're mainly using a recursion, so the charge time is very good. 3 into wrath, just gun damage, and then extra gun damage to exit skill usage. 3 into awakening, which is just rush shock effectiveness. 1 in a remnant. Now this is actually pretty good because this adds overkill damage, and how much damage our recursion is going to be doing. I think I did a 240k hit on a target dummy before, which wasn't even the max you can hit. And overkilling something is going to create that projectile that does the overkill damage. So that projectile can just chunk anything in the game pretty much. Even say a Wotan or something, it could do a lot of damage to it. Then avatars we went over for that pretty much double action skill usage in a single cooldown. Then 5 in an anima for just increased status effect damage. 4 in a tempest for that extra elemental damage. Now for the items, I'm using a corrosive recursion, which you can use any element recursion you want depending on what you're doing. I was clearly using this for the Wotan fight, so that's why I'm using that, with a phase slam anointed, which increases damage by 300% for a short time, and that is massive. You'll see when using something like this, when you're killing a boss, any phase slam anointed weapon is going to be really good. Now if you're fighting some other boss that is not going to be able to use recursion on, you can just use, as I went over before, Cutsmans with the phase slam or the phase cast anointed on them. Maggies can be pretty good. I have one right here. Crossroads, anything that's going to be good at killing bosses with this anointed is going to be really good with this build as well. So for our shield, we are using the same shield that we're in the other build. Mainly we're using it for on actions go on to gain 50% bonus corrosive damage for 10 seconds. That's mainly what we're looking for. Now these anointeds that can give you the 50% increased elemental damage for 10 seconds do not stack. So if I use a corrosive on the shield and the grenade, it wouldn't increase 100%. One of them wouldn't do anything. So that's why I'm using shock on the grenade, which is also for Wotan needed, because that's mainly how I do all of my shock damage, to take his shields down, or that extra shock damage is really good for taking down all the shields. As we went over before, we're using spiritual driver, then elemental projector as well, and we are also using, for our talents, our action skill element, we're using corrosive because we want that increased damage from elemental projector. 90% with the corrosive from our weapon is massive. Then our action skill element, we're using phase slam. If you have the phase cast anointed, just use the phase cast, and whatever you're using for your augment, it really doesn't matter because we're not even hitting anything with our action skill element. Now if you want to use phase cast, you can just use the soul sap, which is going to give you extra healing. And that's pretty much all for the talents and the abilities we're using, and that's pretty much it for the entirety of the build. and both the builds. So subscribe if you want to see more Borderlands 3 content. Leave a like if you liked the video. Leave a comment down below if you have any questions about either of these two variants, how they work, what they're used for, where to get any of the items for these two variants. Leave a comment down below. I'll try to reply to everybody, and thanks for watching.